All right, everyone. Welcome to the first PowerPoint of the class. The PowerPoint is a lecture by me. I will go through it with you. And it's going to be on what I'm calling the foundations of philosophy. And these are basic concepts that will start us off, kind of give you an umbrella picture of the discipline of philosophy, what it's about, what its central questions are. And this is the beginning of going through a number of different traditions, philosophers, texts, ideas, to get a better sense of what philosophy is all about. And as you can see from the syllabus, if you've taken a look at the weekly schedule, we're going to begin with this idea of the foundation of philosophy. And of course, we'll then go to where philosophy in the West begins. And I think also, getting a better sense of what the central questions are for philosophy is going to be very helpful. Okay, so with that, let me get my trusty share screen going here. And let's see, we got that. Make sure I get this right, get the right one. Again, I'm still learning how to do Zoom and sharing PowerPoints and all that. My tech skills are fairly low, so I'm going to do my best to get through it. And if you have any questions along the way, just write them down, and then you can certainly email me the questions if I'm not clear enough, and I'm happy to clarify. Okay, so let's get going with our first lecture. And okay, get this going. So one of the first things that that people ask when you talk about, I get this a lot. People ask me what I do, and I say, well, I'm an administrator at university, and I also teach courses. And one area subject that I teach is philosophy. And one of the first questions I get is, what is that all about? And, some people who have had philosophy in their background might have some explanation to it, but for the most part, a lot of people don't know what this is. I mean, philosophy can seem incredibly strange for people. Well, the first place to begin is just breaking down the word philosophy. And if you open up, the majority of introduction to philosophy textbooks, you're going to start off with this basic explanation. At philosophy, the term itself is a combination of two Greek words. The first is philein, and that's one of the Greek words for love. There are several Greek words for love. One is agape, the other is erotica or erotic. In this sense, philein is a kind of love of one's neighbor, or a brotherly love, or something to that effect. And in this case, it's tied to the Greek word Sophia. And so philein Sophia, or philosophy, is basically this idea of the love of wisdom. And so, you sort of begin with this idea that you're going to study a discipline that is going to explore, examine, pursue with a philein love of wisdom. Well, okay, that tells us what the word is, but it's just the tippy top of the surface of what this is all about. But that's a good beginning. And so one way to think about it, Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, we're going to see him at length here in a couple of weeks. He believed that philosophy begins with a sense of wonder, a sense of wondering about the human being, the nature of reality, the good life, what knowledge is. We're going to see a lot of this coming up with Plato, but a sense of wonder. And certainly the history of philosophy demonstrates that people throughout the ages, whether you're in the Western tradition or in the Asian tradition or indigenous tradition, all the traditions that human beings have been a part of for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, have wondered about things. And out of this wonder comes a philosophy, right? A sort of a seeking, a pursuit of what I will eventually describe as the class goes on, deep questions. And we're going to see a little bit of what those questions are. So now that we have, this idea that philosophy is the love of wisdom, what is the discipline of philosophy about? Well, some argue that philosophy is the search for a unity of knowledge. It begins with that sense of wonder, as Plato was talking about, or curiosity. It considers the what if, right? Hypotheticals, the possibilities of our lives. And it's asking, this view says, a very powerful question. Why? Right? Unlike other disciplines that will describe reality, or just investigate, like in science, we might investigate how the natural world operates. In philosophy, we would ask a more basic question. Why is there something rather than nothing? That might be one of the questions we would ask. But why? We're asking for the explanation. And that's certainly true in Western philosophy. I'm going to start making distinctions at some point, between Western philosophy and other traditions. I got my trusty tea here too, so I'm going to be sipping as we go along. Another aspect or another view of philosophy is that in philosophy, we're not creating new facts about the world. But think about it this way. It's the human desire to synthesize or integrate existing facts, what we already know. A desire, you might say, about philosophy is to put the puzzle together with all the things that we already have. But the powerful focus of philosophy, the way that I would describe it in this class and get you to think about it, is that philosophy is that discipline that probes deeply into life's enduring questions and problems. And what it's doing, philosophy, we're going to see this with Socrates quite a bit, it exposes the hidden assumptions about ourselves, about society, about the world, about the natural world. And it goes beyond the surface of everyday consciousness or talk, or everyday things that we see. It's asking more fundamental things, this thing called philosophy. So here's how historically some have described philosophy, that it's the liberation of the mind. Others have described it as a freedom from the social, political, and religious prejudices. This is certainly true in the Enlightenment. We'll see that in the 17th and 18th century. Figures like Descartes and Kant would be great examples there. We'll study them. Right? For others, philosophy is about the care and the well-being of your soul. And soul isn't this sort of Christian sense of soul, but it is soul in the sense of the mind. Socrates is going to describe the soul as the what we really are as human beings. He discovers, you might say in the West, the soul, the essence of us, thinking, knowing beings. For others, philosophy is answering the question, what is this all about? What is this thing we call human existence all about? But the jury is out, whether philosophy has or even can deliver on these aims. But what is historically the case is that philosophy is that discipline that is uniquely qualified to at least attempt to fulfill the aims of answering these questions, unlike any other discipline. So let me offer a couple of things about philosophy that I think you'll start to see as the class goes on. And the first is sort of a counterintuitive claim that philosophy has a practical value. Many students that I teach wonder about the practical value of philosophy. At my current university, St. Martin's University, we require students to take a philosophy course. And I get this from students all the time. Why should I study this anyway? It doesn't have any practical value to my career or even to my major. And for many students and even faculty colleagues that I have the pleasure of working with, philosophy is too vague, it's undefined, it's impractical to world affairs, it's a useless activity. That's probably the one that I hear that cuts to the deep, so to speak. But in philosophy, we don't study a narrow aspect of learning that relates directly to a career or even to a major, right? It doesn't supply students with definitive answers, right? This is what frustrates people a lot. Philosophy is not answering the questions, right? Or even a fixed, pre-established body of knowledge is not generated necessarily, right? But I certainly, as a philosophy instructor, I expect students to know the discipline, and so that's one thing that you'll be doing in this class is memorizing key concepts and figures and text to get a sense of what philosophy has been about for quite some time. So as I'm teaching you this class, and this is the practical value of it, I recognize that I'm going to present philosophical material not as a fixed body of knowledge, right? But as enhancing your ability to be, this is how we would describe it in the class, a better thinker, a better human being who thinks and engages in the world. So let me offer a couple of ways that philosophy can be practical. That it's an ability to think clearly about complex material texts and ideas. Certainly, philosophy gives you the skill of writing logically and critically and passionately about your own beliefs and ideas, right? So taking those two right there, to be a better thinker, to be a clearer thinker, to explain why you hold certain things that you do, to give a rational justification, I'll talk about that in a bit, but to do it clearly is a skill that you need in your life. There's no question about that. The last is, think about the people that you engage in your life, your closest friends, your loved ones. If you're a parent, the children you're raising. This idea of formulating a worldview, your beliefs, your ideas about what's true, what's not true, what's valuable, what's worth pursuing in life. Teaching children how to be ethical, how to be moral. Those are philosophical pursuits. So a class like this is going to get you to strengthen those skills. And hopefully, if I've done it right, it's getting you to think clearly about the worldview that you already inhabit. Okay, the next is to think of philosophy as a rational activity. And we certainly would say that philosophers seek wisdom, right? In philosophy, let me go ahead and just put these up here. Philosophy, we don't blindly accept what others believe or propose. We critically analyze beliefs and truth claims. And this is especially true in what seems to be a post-truth environment that we're in, a sort of, a dismissing of facts or a denial of what is verifiable and justifiable. Sort of a rational enterprise seems to be diminished these days. In philosophy, we are deeply interested in truth claims in the light of reason and evidence. And a philosopher, if you're trained well, you accept the responsibility of what you believe and the reasoning that led you to those beliefs. So in philosophy, we must be open to scrutiny, right? Scrutiny and of other viewpoints. No single person's ideas are absolutely definitive or carry special authority, right? We are limited, finite human beings. And so in philosophy, we sort of, take that premise to heart. Not everyone can step outside of the human situation and see truth as it is. As a human being, you are trained up, so to speak, in some kind of activity of understanding the world and yourself. That's what all of us have to do. So in philosophy, we also recognize that other people have valid viewpoints. There's a kind of openness that we should have, but we shouldn't confuse this with the following statements: that an open-minded person never believes anything at all, or that you never accept any idea as true. This is the idea of skepticism. Or that an open-minded person believes that anything that anyone believes to be true thereby is in fact true. This is known as relativism. An open-minded person believes, we would challenge this, that nothing is ever really true, and that no idea is ever any better than any other idea. This is a view known as nihilism. An open-minded person never critically assesses other people's ideas or beliefs. That a philosopher who's open-minded, this view would say, is tolerant of any and all views. This is an extreme view of tolerance. Now, each of these statements that I just stated expresses a particular philosophical position: skepticism, nihilism, etc. But none of them captures the sense in which the philosopher might be open. Right? True, a philosopher must be open to where the investigation might lead. Right? But that doesn't mean that the above questions or the above descriptions of what a philosopher does should be accepted. For skepticism, the philosopher should not reject all beliefs or believe in anything at all, only that a philosopher should not be prejudiced toward or against any particular idea. That's one way of thinking about what philosophy does as a rational activity. For relativism, the philosopher should be critical of truth claims or beliefs and be willing to assess that some of these may in fact be false. Not all claims and beliefs are in fact true, that there are some things that simply should not be accepted. But that doesn't mean that there are no beliefs that should be accepted. There are some that are actually true, you could say. For a nihilist, to answer the nihilist, the philosopher should be willing to accept the possibility that some things are actually true after all. And this is something that I find that I'm confronting more and more these days. Kind of, well, nothing is true, and why even bother? But in philosophy, we're going to say that there is something out there that is true. And we need to investigate what that means and how do we verify that and what that means for us and what truth is. I mean, that's another thing we're going to have to figure out. But you don't have to go to this sort of extreme nihilistic position is all I'm trying to say. Extreme tolerance, while the philosopher might uphold important rights to believe in certain things, the moment these things become public, right, the moment that you put your ideas out there, they are up for debate and critical scrutiny. Right? Just because someone believes X, whatever X is, does not mean that X cannot be assessed. And that's another thing that a tolerance will keep us, if you do an extreme tolerance, will do. It will keep us from interrogating another person's point of view. The last thing that I would say about this is that philosophy is a living tradition. Okay. And by this, I mean that sorry. Let me get this right here. We want to go next. There we go. Okay. That Western philosophy as a rational activity leads to this idea that it is a living tradition. It goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. And as you saw in the class syllabus, we're going to start with the ancient Greeks. We're going to think about them and their ideas and what they started in Western culture that eventually inspires Europe and the Christian West to articulate a particular worldview. Again, doesn't mean that it's the only one out there. But in this class, we will focus on how the Western tradition took up philosophy, and that begins with the ancient Greeks. And what we find with the Greeks is that they believed wholeheartedly in the power and dignity of human reason. We're going to see this with Socrates, certainly with Plato. And so what I'm hoping that we get out of this class is that the study of philosophy is to see ourselves as belonging to long-standing traditions of thought. It doesn't mean it's the right way. It means that we already belong to a way of thinking. The task is not merely to know what the Greeks or what these traditions believed or proposed, but to understand that our engagement with the living tradition is what matters. Okay, very quickly, let me just introduce to you what we're going to call the four main areas of philosophy. They are metaphysics, By the way, this is language that you're not going to be used to necessarily, especially in metaphysics. And the next one is epistemology, ethics, and logic. Let me just very quickly cover what each of these are. So in metaphysics, it just sort of, don't think about metaphysics in that sort of new age discourse that comes up, I think, enough where we get confused about what this term is. The study of metaphysics is really in philosophy, and it goes back all the way to Plato, the study of the ultimate characteristics of reality or existence. And what we're doing in metaphysics is asking or investigating the fundamental nature of what is. Okay. I'll throw in another term later on in the class called ontology. That's a closely connected term with metaphysics. But basically in metaphysics, we're asking these questions. What is the nature of reality? What is the nature of the self? What is the relationship between the mind and body? Do we have personal freedom? That is, are we free as human beings? What are the arguments for and against the existence of God? Is there life after death? And does life have a meaning or a purpose, or is it hostile to us? I mean, these are the classic questions that philosophers who do metaphysics have raised. We'll explore several of these. The second one is epistemology. And epistemology derives from the Greek word episteme, knowledge. This is basically the study of knowledge, identifying and developing criteria or methods for what we know and why we know it. In epistemology, we're going to ask questions like, what is truth? We talked about that already a little bit. Can we ever really know anything? What are the sources of our knowledge? And what's the relationship between truth and knowledge? And how can we increase our wisdom? What I tell students in my class is that epistemology is basically, it's asking the question, how does the knower, or to what extent does the knower know the known? What is our knowledge? Where does it come from? What's the basis of our knowledge claims? Those kinds of questions. The third area is ethics, and ethics shows up quite a bit in other disciplines, but it was philosophy that really got us thinking about questions about moral values and principles, a theoretical approach to human behavior. And then in the Greek tradition, we're going to see, especially with Aristotle, that ethics has to do with the good life. What does it mean to live in a flourishing life? Questions that come up in ethics: how should we treat other people? Is there a good life for human beings? What's the relationship between moral values and religion? And how do we decide what moral rightness is for social justice or social issues? The last area is logic. Logic is, you might say, the method, the pathway by which we engage these deep, complex questions in philosophy. Logic is basically the study of reason that seeks to establish the rules of correct reasoning, clear understanding, and valid arguments. For the rest of this week, you'll be engaging in a number of different module pages where you're going to learn something about what logic is after. And this is a very important starting point for the class. We're not going to spend a whole bunch of time on logic, but we will start off with the differences between, say, deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. You'll see that in the pages to follow. The questions that logicians ask: what are the logical principles of correct reasoning? How do people use incorrect reasoning to reach false conclusions? I've got a number of slides that have to do with examples of false reasoning. These are called fallacies. Okay. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about, this is just one way of thinking about what philosophy does. And this is your chance. If you've never done something like this before, this is your chance to do this exercise. A couple of questions here, and to sort of start thinking deeply about what you already value. What do you most value in your life, and why? This is something that a philosopher would ask. What moral beliefs influence your choices? How do you determine the right thing to do? What is the basis for that for you? Okay? And lastly, which is sort of the beginning of the philosophy of life paper that I want you to start thinking about. You don't have to write anything just yet, but I just want you to start thinking about it with this question: what gives your life meaning? And this is a question that we'll grapple with, especially in the last couple of weeks of the course. And it's going to get you to think about, and I think I would add, one of the most important contributions of philosophy to human beings, and that is, what is a life that is worth living? And begin thinking about that for you. Okay, everyone, that's the presentation for right now. Each week, I'll give a PowerPoint presentation on some of the key ideas. At this point, what you want to do is start going through the modules. I think this one's called Understanding Arguments, I think is what it's titled. And there are a number of modules that you'll go through, and there'll be a quiz at the end. And the quiz will assess the concepts that we talked about in this presentation, and also for understanding arguments. Okay, everyone, good luck. Any questions, feel free to send an email, and we'll talk soon. Okay. So